Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be carrying on with our digital mixers series. We've done a number of videos in this series so far. So we've done looking at gains and gain structures and how we set gains. We looked at EQ and how to dial in EQ. We took a little bit of a sidestep and looked at some theory around the ADSR envelope and how we understand sound in that ADSR envelope. We then moved back into the practical world where we looked at the compressor and how the compressor applies to that ADSR envelope. And then today we're going to start picking up on some outputs. And actually this has come in response from this comment. I had a comment on the channel here from Crayfish saying, hey, I'm still learning sound and currently I'm using an SQ6. Can you do something about pre and post faders? Well, Crayfish, yes I can. Sorry it's taken me a little while to get to this, but today we're going to deal with this question for you. So if that sounds good, why don't you go ahead and hit the thumbs up button and then sit yourself in, because we're going to go and have a look at pre and post fader outputs and bus sends generally and how we can send audio out of our mixing desks. So once again here I have my mixer software in front of me so I can take a look at the settings that I'm using inside the mixing desk. So for those of you who don't know, I use an Allen & Heath SQ5. It's just down here. It's a really good console, but it doesn't really matter what console you're using. The settings are going to be the same pretty much in pretty much every console that we look at. So whatever you've got, you will find the same things on your console, but this is the control software for mine. Mine is just out of the camera shot, so you can't really see it. Instead, I'm going to show you the software so you can see what I'm doing. So here I am in my software for my computer, and straight away you can see down the right hand side here we've got a whole bunch of potential outputs that we can send our audio to. Now ordinarily we would be looking at the main left and right, and our software and our mixing desk would look something like this. And every time I push up one of these faders, the audio will start to come out of the speakers in the room, and you pull it down and it comes down in the speakers in the room. But we have the ability to send audio not just to our main front of house speakers, but to any of our outputs. And the great thing about digital mixing is that there is so much flexibility in this area. We can do all kinds of things with sending audio. We can send the same audio to multiple places. We can send different audio to different places. We've got loads and loads and loads of options. If we rewind in time slightly back to the days of analog audio, analog mixing desks had both positives and negatives to them, because analog mixing desks were fairly structured in the way that they work. There was very little flexibility. You couldn't really adjust things very much. Now that was great because it meant that everything was very predictable. Everything was always going to be in the same places. You couldn't change things, and therefore you couldn't get yourself confused and mixed up. But the downside of that was that there was very little flexibility and there was very little in what you could do, certainly in regards to what we can do in digital, and we'll see more of this in a little while. But it meant that if you saw a socket on your mixing desk that was labelled AUX1 out, then you knew exactly what that was going to be. It was going to be the AUX1 mix output, and anything you plugged into there that was sent to AUX1 would be appearing on that socket. Now we don't really have that on digital mixing desks these days. When it comes to digital audio, anything can be mapped to anything else, and this is great for flexibility. It means there are so many things that we can do with this, but it can also be quite bad in terms of being able to follow routing and patching and what have we sent where and where's it going and how's it getting there. Let me just show you some examples of this just so that you can understand something of what I'm saying. So if I go to the I/O patch, this is the place on an Allen & Heath console where we will see our patching taking place. You can see on the back here, this is what we call a routing matrix, and the routing matrix actually will show us what is being routed to what of our outputs. Now effectively here what I've got a few outputs here and they're just labelled up just for things that I've done in the past. So I've got drums, stage, zoom, aux 4, aux 5 left and right, aux 6 left and right, aux 7 left and right, etc. Now this would effectively have been aux 1, aux 2, aux 3, aux 4, aux 5. And you can see that they are patched. So aux 1 was patched to socket number 1, aux 2 to socket number 2, aux 3 to socket 3, 4 to 4, 5 to 5, so on and so forth. However, there are a few things that we can do here that we could change. So, for example, we could take aux 1, our drum feed, and we could patch it to aux 1, to output 1, sorry. We could also patch that to output 2. And that same aux 1 mix is now going to 2 different outputs. Now this might be particularly helpful with things like Zoom and online and live streaming. If you have a console that is sending feeds out to multiple places that are all being used for various live streaming feeds, so you could, for example, have a live stream going to YouTube as well as a more private kind of conversation going to Zoom, and we want the same audio to go to both of those 2 places. Rather than having to create 2 separate mixes, one to send to your live stream and one to send to Zoom, we could just select the same mix and send it to 2 outputs. So there can be times when this is really helpful, and it can save you loads of time and loads of effort and just make life a whole load easier for you. However, the downside is that things can become a little bit less straightforward. Things that perhaps might seem obvious and not necessarily so. So, for example, if I were to now go, because I've got my drums mix being sent out on output 2, physical output number 2, I might think that if I go to aux 2, I can adjust the levels of output 2. But I can't because it isn't being patched there. And what we start to see here is that physical output sockets, like the actual socket on the back of your mixing desk, the thing that you plug the wire into, is completely independent from your mixes. So we have our mixes, what we might call a mix bus, we sometimes refer to it, our mix buses, and our physical output sockets are 2 completely different things, and they're not necessarily mapped to each other, 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3. And we also see that down here. Aux 5 left is mapped to output 5, but aux 5 right, because this is a stereo aux, we've got stereo left and right, we could do a stereo monitor on this. Aux 5 in 5, aux 5 right in 6. Now if I want to adjust aux 6, I'm actually having to go to physical outputs 7 and 8. So you can see how things can start getting quite confusing. If I find something that is plugged into socket number 6, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's mapped to aux bus number 6. Hopefully you can follow that and that makes sense. So we have aux buses or mix buses, and we have the physical outputs or aux outputs, sometimes you might call them. But we need to be careful not to just connect the 2. They are not one and the same thing. They are different, they are separate, they are independent of each other, and we can send anything to anything. And the possibilities are fairly limitless when it comes to digital audio. So let's just put that back again, and let's head back to our previous page. Okay, so we've seen mix buses and we've seen outputs. 2 separate things, doing different things. Don't connect the 2 up in your head because they are independent of each other. Always check, never assume when it comes to that kind of stuff. So now what we can see as we look down this right-hand side, and the screen here is actually mirrored on the console itself. So on the actual mixing desk, I've got a physical row of buttons that runs down the right-hand side of the mixing desk that do exactly the same as this row of buttons on the right-hand side of my screen. Different mixing desks might put them in different places, but almost all mixing desks are going to have this same kind of feature. So I can now select here aux 1. And when I do that, what I'm selecting is a mix bus. I am looking at aux mix bus number 1, and working out what am I going to send on that aux bus number 1. Now, as I say, aux bus number 1 doesn't necessarily mean that it's patched to output number 1. We did just see in this instance that they are patched into the same places, 1 to 1, 2 to 2, so we know that that is the case, but it might not be in your case, so don't assume that it is. So this is our mix bus, aux mix bus number 1. Now, for a minute, what I'm going to do is just expand this up. We don't need to see any of the other processing information here. What we're going to look at is our channel strips and what we're sending. Now, the particular question that I was asked on that YouTube comment was, can I talk about pre and post fade mix buses? And we see here in the software a little button that says pre. And you will find this somewhere on all your consoles. They will have this ability to be able to switch between pre and post fade. But what does that mean? With a lot of mixing desks, and this was true back in the days of analog as well, although it was often a lot more difficult to do it, certainly with digital, it's really, really simple. We can actually choose the point where we take a mix out of the mixing desk. So when it comes to our mix buses, aux1 mix bus, we can choose at what point are we going to take it out of the system. Now, probably the easiest way to understand this is if I head here into the routing tab. And what you will see here is this is actually a direct out. So this isn't a mix bus out. What I'm taking here is a direct channel output. So this is just one particular channel. And what I'm saying is, where do I want to take the output of this channel? Like at what point in the chain? And as I go through this, you'll see how this makes sense. So my options are, I could take it out post preamp, post meaning after. So I could take it out directly after my preamp. So that means my signal source will come into the mixing desk, into the preamp, and then straight away, straight back out again. And we use this all the time for multi-track recording. If you're doing a multi-track recording, if, for example, you wanted to record a live worship album in your church, you would almost certainly want to take post-preamp as your output point for all your individual channels, which means that any processing that you do in your mixing desk, bearing in mind that when we mix on a mixing desk, we're mixing for that particular room, and all the background noise and stuff that's going on in that room, and the way that that room, the sound bounces around that room, all the EQs, compression, all that kind of stuff is based on that particular room. We don't want any of that for the recording. What we want on the recording is a completely clean channel with no processing on. So we're taking it post preamp. So as soon as it's gone through the preamp, that's what we want, nothing else done to it. Okay, but we can go through and we can look at the other options. We could go post HPF, high pass filter. So we looked at this in the EQ settings where we started to remove the low frequencies of our sound. You could go past your high pass filter and then take everything after that point. Next option is post gate. We've not actually looked at gates in this course, but that would be part of the processing chain, and you could take it out after the gate. Post insert return, again, not really dealt with that, but that's another point where we take it out. Post EQ, we've looked at EQing, so we could take all of our EQ. So if you did want to take all your EQ and record out everything with an EQ on it, you've got the ability to do that. Post compressor, we've looked at compression, so again we could apply our EQ and our compression. At this point, everything that we've looked at so far is being applied to the sound that is going out of the mixing desk. So when we get through, anything that's being put out at this point is going through the gain, through the preamp, it's going through the high pass filter, it's going through the gate, it's going through the insert, it's going through the EQ, and it's going through the compressor before it's being sent anywhere. Okay, so it's just worth knowing, there's no right or wrongs to all of this stuff, it's just worth knowing that that is something that could be done. Post delay, you could add a channel delay on it. Now here, because this is a direct channel output, we've got no further options. That's the last of the chain. But if we're looking at a mix bus rather than a channel direct output, we would be able to go one step beyond this and actually instead look at post fade mixing. Now, anything that we've looked at here at this point is all going to be considered pre-fade. This is all pre-fade mixing. We haven't yet got to the channel fader. That's everything that's happening before it gets to the channel fader. The next step on beyond that would be post-fade. So as you can see, there are loads of places we could choose to take our audio output from. If we go back to our processing page, and we'll just expand this output up again so we can see this. So again, we're looking at aux1 mix bus 1, and now we've got the option to choose whether we want a channel to be taken out pre or post fade. Okay, so this is pre-fade, means pre the main left and right fader position. So if I, in my main left and right, turn a fader up, do I want that volume change to be reflected in my output or not? Okay, and depending on where we're sending that audio, we may or may not want that change to be reflected. If my aux bus number 1 is being sent to a monitor, and do you remember the labeling at the beginning? We had this labeled as a drum send. This is sending to a drum monitor. If we're sending this to a drum monitor, we almost certainly do not want any changes in the front of house to be reflected in that monitor. We don't want to have anything being changed. If the drummer's happy with his sound, we just want to leave that sound and we don't want to be changing anything. Which means that we want a pre-fade mix. That means it's going out before it gets to those faders, the left and right fader positions. So any change that I make to this is irrelevant because the sound has already left the mixing desk before I make any changes here. Okay, so this is a pre-fader mixing bus. Okay, so any sound that's being sent out is before the fader. So any changes I make to the fader are irrelevant on that particular bus output. Okay, now if we go back into aux1, and this time, let's assume that this isn't a drum send, but this is a live stream send. So personally, I quite like a live streamed feed to be a post-fade mix. And what that means is any changes I make in the speakers will be reflected online. Now this does depend on your particular situation. If you are in a position where you have 2 people mixing sound, one of them mixing for in-house and one of them mixing for online, you might want to make these as 2 separate mixes, and you might want to have it as a pre-fade mix so any changes in-house don't affect the online. But if you are in a position where you have one sound engineer who's mixing both for in-house and online from the same console, then I would use a post-fade mix, because what it means is that if the preacher gets up to preach and I push the fader up for it to come through the speakers, as soon as I push that fader up for it to come through the speakers, it is also going to be pushed up to go into the online mix as well. And likewise, once the preacher's finished and I pull that fader down, it will pull it out of the speakers and it will also pull it out of the live stream as well. So the 2 will mirror each other on a post-fade mix. And that can be really helpful for a live stream if you are having to manage 2 mixes. You don't want to have to pull it out of the house and pull it out of the live stream. You're just creating more work for yourself. So using a post-fade mix at that point will actually make your life easier to a certain extent. It's always going to be very difficult if you are one sound engineer on one console mixing for both in-house online. There's always going to be compromises to be made. For me, a post-fade mix actually really helps you to be able to make those judgments, and anything you feel is too loud in-house is probably going to be too loud on the live stream as well, and you might well find that anything you turn down in-house could do with being turned down online. It's a generalization, but for me, I find that a slightly easier way to work. So here in this particular piece of software, actually when it's grayed out here, that actually means that that setting is on, and when I click it and it goes blue, that now means that that setting is off. Slightly confusing, I think, in this software. It's actually a lot clearer on the console, but that is how it appears on the software. So if we want to see this effect being applied, we can turn up our master fader here, and as I do, you'll see that my audio is now going out of this particular feed. So we can see here This is the output, this is the effect that is actually finally being sent out of that output. And as I talk, my audio is being sent out here. Now I'm going to make no adjustments to my mix bus 1 layer. Everything's going to be left the same. What I'm going to do is flick back to main left and right. And then here in main left and right, I'm going to pull down that particular channel. So this is the preacher channel, let's assume. Preacher's just got to the end of the sermon. And now if we get back to our aux bus 1 mix, we can see that there is nothing being sent to the output because this is now a post-fade mix, and that main left and right fader position is being applied to the output of our mix bus send here. So when I turn it down in the house, it turns it down on that mix bus. As soon as I turn this back to pre-fade again, the audio will start to appear back on that main send because now it is not being applied to that main left and right output. So hopefully that's making sense to you so far. So we've got pre-fade, pre the fader. Before we get to the fader, our audio is being sent out. Post-fade, after the fader, post the fader, our mix is being sent out. And the two places where we might choose to use those, there are a number of different places where we might see that happening, but that's just one of the options for you. So that's pretty much it really. That's pre and post fade auxes. As we've covered today, there is a difference, and you need to make sure you don't ever get yourself mixed up between physical sockets on a digital mixing desk and mix buses. It's well worth just getting your head to differentiate between physical sockets, actual sockets that you plug things into, and mix buses. They are two independent things and they can be routed in and out of each other independently. We saw that in our mixing matrix, the I/O matrix up here in our patch panel, where we could send different things to different outputs. And then once you've decided where you're going to send things, you then need to decide whether that's pre-fade or post-fade. And as we saw, it is done on a per channel basis. So there might be some channels that you want to have pre-fade and some channels that you want to have post-fade. You can mix and match between those two, that's absolutely fine. But they're all going to be doing the same thing. They're all going to be choosing whether that main left and right, what is being sent to the speakers, does that volume level there affect what is being sent to that mix bus output. And it's completely independent between every individual channel. It's also completely independent between every mix bus. So I could have this channel here post fade on mix bus 1, aux 1. I could go to aux 2 and it's now set back to pre-fade, and again I can choose whether that's going to be pre or post on aux 2, mix bus 2, and again on 3 and 4 and 5. All of them are completely independent. They all have the ability per channel to choose whether it's going out pre the fader or post the fader. It's entirely up to you. There is loads of flexibility when it comes to aux sends, mix bus outs, pre and post fade. The sky's the limit. As I say, it's a bit of a two-edged sword. You do have a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility when it comes to digital with regards to sending audio out and how you're going to do that. But you can't assume anything. You've got to double check everything at every stage, because it's so easy to lose track of what mix buses are being sent to what are the outputs, and whether that's pre or post fade. It can get confusing. It can be complicated, so just think it through. It's all fairly logical if you just take some time to think about it, but don't assume anything. Just make sure everything is checked and double checked. Ask a friend to come and sit with you. I will often do that. If I program up a mixing desk, I will often then say to somebody, hey, just come and idiot check this for me, would you? And I then sit through and I will verbally talk through them. Okay, so I've put this here and I've routed that there and I've made this pre-fade and I've made that post-fade. And you can then double check yourself by speaking it out loud to a second person, and hopefully they can follow what you've done. I think that's often the most helpful way to track through that process if you ever get yourself confused. Speak it out, talk it through with a friend, and you can follow that through fairly logically, what is going where and how are you sending it. So hopefully that's been helpful for you. That was my guide to pre and post fade mix buses and how we get audio out of our console. If that was helpful, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel and hit that bell icon so you can see the rest of my videos with regards to digital audio and setting up a digital mixer. That's it for today. I'll see you in the next one.